Today we're gathering for a Chassidic Farbrengen. Farbrengen is a Yiddish word which actually means to sit together or to spend time together. And one of the Chassidic practices is to have an informal gathering, which is based on camaraderie. And the form of teaching is through song and through stories. And we learn from one another. Well, Yud Tes Kislev, the 19th day of Kislev, is an extraordinary day. It is a day that some 214 years ago in Tsarist Russia, an official decree from the Tsar came out saying that he acknowledges the Chassidic movement as a bona fide religious organization, very much today as if you would get your non-profit status. As part of the Jewish religion, they should not be molested and they should be permitted to teach and propagate their teachings. And the rabbis actually tell us the story that there was a very prominent Jewish teacher, a theologian, a great tzaddik, a great saint, and his name was Rabbi Shner Zalman, and he was the spiritual grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. So we're talking the third generation of the Chassidic movement. And he taught and popularized not only the Chassidic way of life, but essentially taught the ideology of Chassidut. Essentially, he dealt with questions like who we are, what is a commandment, what is a mitzvah, why, if we follow a ritual, are we bound up with the Almighty, what difference does it make to God that we do or don't do. And essentially, he was looking for the soul of the Torah, and he began teaching these teachings or these secrets. There was a tremendous amount of opposition to him, both from people on earth, those that were concerned that these ideas were far too revolutionary to be accepted and understood by ordinary people. And this reflected a spiritual issue. In heaven, there was a great debate whether or not the ordinary Jew is privileged to be taught the secrets and the Kabbalah of the Torah. Well, this great holy tzaddik was slandered by his opponents, and he was accused of being a counter-revolutionary, and he was put into prison for 50 to 53 days. During this time, his physical welfare was being decided, which clearly meant that his spiritual mission in life, which was to teach the secrets of Torah and to propagate the Chassidic way of living, was also being held in abeyance. When in heaven it was decided that the Chassidic way of life is not only a bona fide expression of Judaism, but in many ways it is the soul, it is the vibrancy, and it brings a joyfulness of being Jewish to all Jews. When in heaven it was decided that this is imperative for the latter generations to be exposed to, then physically the Tsar of Russia was convinced by his advisors that the rabbi was not a counter-revolutionary and should be given the full respect of a great teacher of Israel. So here we are, some 214 years later, after this momentous day of the 19th day of Kislev, and we're celebrating the opportunity to be Chassidim, the opportunity to study the Torah, the privilege of being involved in the secrets of the Torah, and most of all, through this particular way of life, preparing ourselves for the imminent coming of the Mashiach.
Tonight is Yud Tes Kislev, the 19th day of Kislev. We sit together to celebrate the redemption of the Alter Rebbe, and actually, and to a certain extent, the resurgence of the Chassidic movement. The Chassidic movement was founded by the holy Baal Shem Tov some over 300 years ago. However, with the holy Baal Shem Tov's teachings, he taught there's the teachings of Chassidus and the pathway or the ways of Chassidus, and that was his legacy was passed on through through his main student, the Maggid of Mezrich, though he had other students as well. But the teachings of Chassidus were not popularized to the extent where people could study it. In other words, what people would do is they would follow a certain path, and they were told to have a certain attitude, and certainly to be connected to a holy tzaddik. But to actually, so to speak, to drink from the same well that the Rebbe himself drank from, in order to absorb the same teachings that the Baal Shem Tov himself was teaching others, that was not yet until the Alter Rebbe, the first Rebbe of Chabad, through the teachings of Chabad. We'll talk a little bit about the history of Yutes Kislev, but first I want to start off actually with an interesting story from the Baal Shem Tov, and then bring it in terms of Yutes Kislev. There's a story told of the Holy Baal Shem Tov that he had many Chassidim and Chassidistas, or I think I pronounced it correctly, men Chassidim and female Chassidim, which in parentheses, this is one of the innovations of the Chassidic movement in general when it came to studying the formal study of Talmud and of codes. As a general rule, men were obligated, women were not, and hence it was unheard of that women would travel to the dean of an academy. I mean, whoever went to the dean of the academy or to the Rosh HaYeshiva, the one that was actually the teacher or the one that sat and taught, he was teaching Torah to men. But when it came to Chassidus, being that Chassidus is not only about the study of Talmud and Jewish law, but primarily the idea of Chassidus is to attach oneself to God. Obviously, Hashem wants men and women equally to be attached to Him, to love Him, to fear Him, to cleave in His ways, and therefore women would travel to the Rebbes of the Chassidic movement, not any less, and occasionally even more than the men. So one of the devoted followers of the Holy Baal Shem Tov was a wealthy widow who lived some miles away from Mezabush, and she knew that in Mezabush, which was the village where the Baal Shem Tov lived, he had essentially open house. Many people came, spent Shabbos eating over there. There was always hachnosas orchim, hospitality, and the obvious question is, who provides for all of this? So good-natured people used to come and bring produce to the Rebbe. They didn't give it to him personally. They would drop it off by the house. It was given over to some of the members of the household, and they would say thank you, and it would be given and used for the community. This Chassidista, we'll call her Rachel, though I don't know her name, her habit was that every 3 to 4 weeks, she herself would make sure that a large wagon was filled with all kinds of fruits and vegetables and all kinds of good stuff. She would bring it over to the Beis Medrash, the house of study from the Holy Baal Shem Tov. Occasionally, she even had the opportunity to greet the Baal Shem Tov. Otherwise, she just left it with the knowledge that it would be used for the community. Well, we all know what the word flash flood means. And one time, she was traveling over a bridge, and she had a big wagon that was quite full and heavy. And as she was traveling over the bridge, literally, it had been raining some days earlier, and a sudden surge of water went through this narrow channel, so went over the small little bridge where people used, and it simply swept the entire wagon to the side. What happened was that the weight of the wagon tumbled over, and not only was the produce lost, but worst of all, a tragedy ensued, and she died as well. When the sad news came to the Baal Shem Tov, he was beside himself. He was a man that loved all Jews. Especially, he was a tzaddik, that was very appreciative to anyone that would help him serve Hashem properly. And here was this wonderful lady who was doing a mitzvah for the community and personally was a devoted follower of the Baal Shem Tov, and she was doing a mitzvah to help him. And because of him, indirectly, she suffered, and he was so upset that he said, I don't understand why this river had permission to sweep her over. If it was up to me, I would declare that the river find another path. Okay, now if me and you were to say it, it would be nothing more than a person speaking bitterly or exasperation. But when the Holy Baal Shem Tov said that, it was the equivalent of a divine decree, and quickly in heaven it was presented that the Holy Baal Shem Tov is angry with the river, as if to say, with the prince of the river. And in heaven ensued a very short court case. The prince of the river said to the heavenly court, I don't know why this holy man is so angry with me. I didn't do this on my own. I'm only following orders. And I was told to give a sudden surge of water. And how was I to know that this lady was over there? And obviously in the heavenly court, there's no mistakes. She was supposed to die through drowning. But the holy tzaddik is taking it out on me. And the other side said, true, you did your part, but that a favorite son, so to speak, that a beloved Jew is so upset, Hashem has to take into account his feelings as well. What was the conclusion? The conclusion was that the river was told to find another path. And essentially that small channel dried up. However, the river was told, if ever it happens that the Baal Shem Tov or the Baal Shem Tov's descendants will be passing through this bridge, you have permission to go back to your old ways. The Baal Shem Tov knew about this and told his son Tzvi, I am your father, and I am commanding you that whenever you have to go to this and this place, do not take the bridge. It's a personal reason, but I want you to follow my injunction, and I want you to take a roundabout way. Of course, the Reb Tzvi, the son of the Baal Shem Tov, never questioned, and though he didn't travel that often, whenever he had to travel that place, he went out of his way. Though it added plenty of time and travail, he would add and to fulfill the will of his father. One time, the story goes that there was an emergency, and Reb Tzvi understood that if he were to take the roundabout way to fulfill his father's command, the mitzvah that he had to fulfill would not be able to do, because the time would have passed. So he thought it over and he said, there's a commandment to listen to my father, kibbud av v'em, respecting father and mother, especially my dad, who is a great tzaddik. On the other hand, my father would know that I'm disobeying him, not because I don't respect him, but because I love the mitzvahs. So I'm sure he'll forgive me. And he starts traveling on the path, which for years, or certainly months, the water had not flowed through. He's on this a bridge which is overlooking pretty much a dry area, and then as he's on the bridge, out of nowhere, a surge of water comes, knocks him over. He's over the bridge and he's floundering in the water, and he realizes that the current is so strong and it's so freakish, it just doesn't make any sense where it's coming from, that if he doesn't get out of this water in a very couple of seconds, he might die. Of course, what does a son in trouble do? Help! But this time, Tata, Ratavu, my father, referring to the Baal Shem Tov, save me. And as he's, I don't know if he knew how to swim or not, but as he's floundering in the water and trying to keep his head above so he could breathe, he sees a candle. And he realizes that there is no candle on top of a water. Somehow this is some type of an indication. So he takes his hand to try to grab the candle. And it seemed as if the candle was leading him out. He was able to take another step, and then he found a rock, and little by little, he was able to get out. So he lies now on the floor, he's exhausted, and he realizes that his father from heaven, the Rabbi Yisrael, the Baal Shem Tov, came to save him. He continues on his path, he does the mitzvah. Certainly on the way home, he doesn't use that path. When he gets home that night, he has a dream. And his father comes to him in a dream and it says, Tzvi, you didn't listen to me. That's number one. But number two, Tzvi, when I heard you cry, I was all the way in heaven. I came down. But little did I realize that in the short space of time, since my death and you living, I had no idea how coarse the world has become. And you should know that when I left you in the form of the candle to go back to my celestial home, I had to go to the equivalent of a mikveh many times. And he then concluded by saying, if I would have known how far gone the world has, how low the world has fallen in the last couple of months, I might have decided that it would not be worth it. It's an interesting story. Why do I bring it in? Because if you think to yourself, if I told you, come tonight, you'll sit with a lot of nice people, which is absolutely true. There are a lot of nice people in the room. Occasionally, some people would say, who's coming? And if I tell you the names of these nice people, and in your eyes they're not so nice, you might decide not to come. But if I tell you, come tonight, you'll sit with a lot of nice people, in addition to which you'll be sitting with neshamas that you can't see. Like the Alter Rebbe will be here tonight, and I think you should make an appearance. Come and say l'chaim in his honor, because he's here. Who would not come? Everyone should be here. Every chassid, every person that knows that Yutes Kislev is here should be Farbrengen in his honor. Because the Alter Rebbe said a very interesting statement. He said, whoever will rejoice in my rejoicing, I promise the following, and there are three versions. Version number one, I promise that I will sell, that if he has to go to, where, hell, I'll take him out. Another version, if he's involved and he's overwhelmed with materialism, if he comes and he celebrates my day, I'll help him get to the world of spirituality. And finally, he said, the third version, if a person finds himself in dire straits or in constricted straits, minat meitzer, I will take him out el hamerchav, I'll make it expansive for him. But I could hear people say, who said the Alter Rebbe wants to come back? If the story of the Baal Shem Tov was that maybe a year or two had passed since his demise, and then for him to come back to save his own son was difficult because of the contrast between the purity of heaven and the ordinariness and the lowliness of this world. If that's true about 1 or 2 or 3 years, could you imagine from the days of the Alter Rebbe to today? Over 214 years have passed. And there's a lot of gashmias and a lot of chumrias, a lot of physicality, a lot of grossness, a lot of unholiness that seem to have been created over these 214 years. Yet the Alter Rebbe clearly says that that's not me. If you will celebrate my day, I'll be here with you, essentially. And that's something which is very, very worthwhile. Not only is it worthwhile, I say with a smile, very worthwhile. I mean, it's an opportunity and a privilege that Chassidim today, especially Chabad Chassidim, which follow the teachings of the Holy Rebbe, gather on a Thursday night when it's difficult for many people. It's the end of the week. People are preparing for Shabbos and so on and so forth. And they say, stop to all of that. And they're going to dedicate X amount of minutes or hours reminding themselves of the Alter Rebbe, reminding themselves of the Chassidic movement, reminding themselves of a historical account which actually should be translated and can be translated into day and day service. When that happens, we have to, we should know and understand that the Alter Rebbe himself will be blessing us. So l'chaim, everybody, the greatest blessing that we can give one another is that we should be Chassidim. So l'shana tova, we should start a new year and a great year of the study of Chassidus, the ways of Chassidus. We should be written and sealed, and may we all be blessed with everything that we need. L'chaim. Being that tonight is Yutes Kislev, the 19th day of Kislev, let me review with you a little bit of the story. For those of us that know, it's a review, and those of us that have forgotten, it's a review. And for those of us that haven't heard it, it's something new. Actually, it's brought down that after the great miracle, and it was a miracle as I'll try to explain in a couple of minutes, after the great miracle of the Alter Rebbe being freed from his prison, the Chassidim gathered together and had wanted very much to write this down in a scroll. And they wanted to write what's called a Megillah, which means a scroll. We have the scroll of Esther, we have other scrolls, and they wanted to write the Megillah Yutes Kislev, the story of Yutes Kislev. And some of the great Torah scholars and of Chassidim actually had prepared it, and they were going to present it to the Alter Rebbe, the Rebbe himself, at the first anniversary 1 year later. But when the Alter Rebbe heard about it, he vetoed the idea. He did not want it to be written down, but he did make the following statement, not word for word, and there were two versions of it. And what he said was that and he sort of implied it does not have to be written down, because this is a day which is written in heaven, and it's written in the hearts of the Jewish people. And on this day, tens of thousands of Jewish people will be inspired to daven, to do teshuvah, to study, and I forget that, and there's like an ending to this statement. So the Chassidim was somewhat disappointed that it wasn't written down in a scroll, but because they had desire to write it down in a scroll, the previous Rebbe writes that it used to be a Chassidic custom to tell over the whole story, just like we tell over the story of the Megillah. In the late 1930s, this custom fell a little bit into disuse. So the previous Rebbe actually had them write down this story, not as a Megillah, as a scroll, but as the story of Yutes Kislev, and it was translated in Yiddish and in Hebrew, and today in English as well. So the name of the book is called The Arrest and the Liberation of the Alter Rebbe, but this is actually from what would have been considered the Megillah of Yutes Kislev. The Alter Rebbe's grandson his name was Reb Menachem Nochem, and he was very, very dedicated to his grandfather, a true chassid. And in 1812, when the Alter Rebbe was running away from Napoleon, his grandson, Menachem Nochem, was with him for close to a half a year. And this Menachem Nochem was the son of the Alter Rebbe. He himself was a great Torah scholar, a great tzaddik. And his custom was, every Yutes Kislev, to tell over the story, just as you read the Megillah. So in the happy parts, like how they freed the Alter Rebbe, he would say it in a joyous voice. The sad parts, which is how he was put into prison, he would say in a sad voice. If someone came in the middle of the story, he would start from the beginning, which then doesn't say this, but I could add, which taught the people to come on time. Because those that did not come on time had to hear it 1.5 and 3.5 and 10.5 times. But he made sure that everyone that was there actually heard the story from the beginning to the end. Before he would give over the story, he would preface it the following. He would say, my grandfather, the Alter Rebbe, Reb Shneir Zalman, was a student by the Maggid of Mezrich for 10 years. He became a student of the Maggid of Mezrich when he was 18 and stayed until the day of his death, literally, when he was 28. After the Maggid of Mezrich passed on to heaven, his students wanted to choose a Rebbe. The Maggid of Mezrich had a son who was very saintly. His name was Reb Avram the Malach, Reb Avram the angel. He refused to take leadership. So what happened then was they decided that they would farbrengen amongst themselves. The senior student at that time was Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk, or Rabbi Menachem Mendel Haradaka. And in the meantime, who would be in charge of day-to-day activities of Chassidim? So he said, my grandfather, who was one of the youngest students at that time, only 28 years old, he led the Chavraya Kadisha, he led the Holy Society for 5 years. During the 5 years, each one of the students of the Maggid of Mezrich took another locality and another province and another country to try to convert them, in italics, to the Chassidic way of life. The Alter Rebbe took the lion's share of opposition, and he took Lithuania. Lithuania at that time was a place which till today has that reputation, but in those days it had the reputation of a place where they loved Torah, and the mind was, I wouldn't use the word was worship, what was admired. Pure logic of Torah. Unfortunately, in the Chassidic way of life does not only extol the mind, it actually wants to harmonize the mind with the heart. So the Alter Rebbe, who had to sell this, to introduce a new idea that it's not enough to be a Talmud Chacham, a great Torah scholar, truly a mind that's churning with Torah thoughts. If it doesn't include a heart that's burning with enthusiasm, there's much to be improved on. So for 5 years, he was in charge of all of the different places, and he himself took Lithuania. After the 5 years, they asked him to take it again. But this time, the Alter Rebbe said no, because it was very clear that during the 5 years, the Alter Rebbe was developing a very unique way of teaching Chassidus, which we call today Chabad, and his other colleagues, holy tzaddikim, felt otherwise. They felt that one should emphasize more the heart, not the mind. So basically, when they offered him the job to run, the organization, which basically meant a young tzaddik would be telling senior tzaddikim what to do, he said, no, obviously you don't agree with my shita, so I'll continue on my own. And then for 20 years, was Mesa Nefesh, gave over his life for the teachings of Chassidus. So those of you that are counting, we got 10 years, 5 years, and 20 years, and then the story of Yutes Kislev takes place. Our Rebbe would ask the question, if Rabbi Menachem Mochem wants to tell the story of Yutes Kislev, why does he start with the history? Why not just start with the story of Yutes Kislev? What happened with this man that we're celebrating tonight? Why do we have to know everything that he did before the story? One of the answers that he gives, and there are many, one of the answers that he gives was the concept to tell us that Yutes Kislev did not happen in isolation. In other words, it's not tonight. We're not celebrating a miracle story only. What would be a miracle story? A righteous man was falsely accused, and according to the laws of the land, he would not have made it through this imprisonment. He would have been killed or exiled, and instead the government freed him. So it's a miracle. Just parenthetically, I'll tell you, though I didn't prepare a story for you, there's a fascinating story about, I can't remember the names. The story is true, but I can't remember the names. I believe it was with the parents of Chernigov. He was a great tzaddik and a chassid. He had a son who was very religious, a chassid as well, and this, his son, I don't know his name, so I'm going to make it up. His name, David, was a contractor. Because he was really, really talented, he managed to become a contractor not only of personal things, but he became very friendly with officials, and little by little, he was getting government jobs. One of the jobs that he had, which was a major undertaking, was to somehow fix or strengthen a bridge. And he did so. He had hundreds of workers, and he was, we're talking about a lot of rubles going back and forth, and he put his heart and soul into it. When the bridge was fixed, the Tsar himself came to examine it. So he had an honor guard, and he looked at the bridge, and there was music playing, and this and that. He was very pleased, and he asked to see the contractor. To his dismay, it was Reb David, a religious Jew. He was hoping to see some ethnic Russian, and then he would, give him the cross of who knows what, and say, you could kiss my hand. But it was a Jew, and he knew he wouldn't kiss any cross. But he is the Tsar, and it is a great mark of honor. So Reb David was presented to the Tsar. The Tsar said, I want to commend you. And Reb David acknowledged. But Reb David perhaps did not do it the right way, because it says that one should fear the king as one fears heaven, and the story goes that he acknowledged it, but he was a little bit snotty, a little bit like, you're not telling me anything that I don't know. What happened was that the Tsar was furious, but of course, it's pasnish. He's the Tsar, he's going to be insulted by a mere Jew. He didn't say anything. They finished with the pageantry. As soon as they leave, the whole entourage, the Tsar stops, calls the head of his guards. He says, you go back, find that Jew who's the contractor, throw him in prison. He was disrespectful to me, and he's to be put into prison. Of course, one does not question. He went back, and Reb David, who was a true good contractor, plus a religious Jew, was thrown into prison. His father was a saint, a tzaddik, and they immediately told Reb Peretz of Chernigov, again, I'm not sure about the names, but the story is true, that his son was taken, and he basically said, I will not eat, I will not sleep until my son is freed. And they knew he wasn't kidding, so he basically retired to the shul for a marathon prayathon. Hashem, if you want me to live, you have to help my son. In the meantime, the Tsar is going, and he gets to the next stop. He calls again the head of the guard. He says, did you throw the Jew in prison? He said, I did, Your Majesty. He said, now go back and free him. So he was like shocked. He didn't say anything. You never questioned. But he was so shocked that the Tsar said, I'll tell you. He says, 2-3 years ago, I was invited to some type of dedication. I went, and afterwards I was in such a good mood, I asked to see political prisoners, and those that I would want, I would pardon. This was an opportunity that does not come very often. So they take me to this political place. It smells bad. It's a real rat. It's a rat hole, and people just rot away for years. And as the Tsar is walking, everyone, to the best of their ability, gets up. Long live the Tsar! Long live the Tsar! Long live the king! We love you! We love you! We love you! He's looking around, and almost arbitrarily, him you're free, him you're free, him you're free. And he notices in one of the cells, there's a man, though he's emaciated, there's a dignity to him. And he's a military man. The Tsar looks at him, and he says, would you like to be pardoned? He says, Your Majesty, I would give my life for you. I've sacrificed 20 years in battle for you. Whatever your wish is, that's my wish. He says, what's your name? He said his name. And his rank. He was like a high-ranking person. What are you doing here? He says, well, one time, His Majesty came to visit the barracks, and His Majesty was displeased with the way the soldiers were dressed and blamed me. So the Tsar says, how many years ago was that? He said, 11 years, or something like that. So he was pardoned. So he then tells his personal, he says, could you imagine a loyal general displeased me, I threw him into jail, and I completely forgot about him for 11 years. But that Jew, David, I can't get out of my mind. Something is happening, so I want him to be freed.
It reminded me, because it's somewhat similar.
So we can tell the story of the Alter Rebbe as a miracle. I mean, that a rabbi should be arrested by the Tsar, accused of being a counter-revolutionary, and then only 8 weeks later, 7 complete weeks, 53 days to be freed is truly a miracle.
His father was praying for him.
You got it. It's truly a miracle. But that's where Rabbi Nachum didn't want to make it into an isolated miracle story. He wanted to put it into the context that the reason why the Alter Rebbe was put into prison was because he was a student, and because he was a dedicated chassid, and because he spent 20 years teaching Chassidus. Now that's the background to the story of Yutes Kislev. Many of us, it's funny, I keep talking about Yutes Kislev, I haven't yet told you what happened. But everyone knows the Parsha of the week. It's about the brothers who sold Joseph. And no matter how many times we study it, everyone debates it. I don't get it. Well, how could they do that? It was wrong. And you try to explain the actions of Joseph, you try to explain the actions of the brothers, you try to show that there's really legally nothing went wrong and it looked bad, but it really wasn't bad. And after all of the explanations, you say, who are you kidding? Brothers sold the brother. So no matter how much you explain it away, it hurts. When we go back to the history of the Chassidic movement, and we say it like this, there were a group of Jews called mitnagdim, opponents. And they saw the Chassidic movement as a threat to Judaism. And maybe in particular the Rebbes of the Chassidic movement, they saw perhaps like Shabbat Tzvi, like a false Mashiach, and therefore they had to go out and oppose them. After all the explanations, it doesn't fly, or it doesn't satisfy. When you see something happening on earth, you're actually being privy or given information of what's happening in heaven. But because we don't live in heaven, our domain address is Earth, Google Earth, so therefore something happens on earth, but we get a sense of what's happening on earth is actually happening in heaven. So if I told you that a czar who has complete control over millions of people, life and death literally are in his hands, who he wishes to live, lives, who he wishes to die, to put to death, he can, I would tell you that that's a graphic representation of God, the King of all kings, who in his hands all existence is dependent. And if I told you that this czar takes a holy teacher of Torah and puts him into prison on some cockeyed excuse, which is, you're rebelling against me. That's the accusation. Your teachings of Torah are really an insult to the Tsarist Russia. So now if we read that carefully, what we're seeing is a holy tzaddik, a righteous individual, a Chassidic master, whose teachings can be seen as what? As an insult to God. How's that possible? It's possible in the following way. If one realizes that the Torah possesses sacred teachings, almost personal teachings of the heavenly court, and should be shared only with those people that are both pious and virtuous, and people that respect heaven, and now a person comes and he reveals these secrets, in brackets, italics, the tabloids. If they could find out a scandal or what's happening personally in the English royal court, everyone snaps it up. But they're pretty upset with these people. How dare you share royal secrets? This is personal stuff. It's not for the people outside. Lahavdil, to make a separation between the mundane and the true. There are parts of Torah that should be shared only with people that are worthy. And Chassidut is a teaching of the most precious parts of Torah. What, so to speak, we could learn from the way God did this and does that. And who's the Alter Rebbe teaching? Ordinary people. You know what? This is a rebellion against the king. This is an insult to Malach Malchei HaMelachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Until now, this is only taught amongst people that work in the palace, and the Alter Rebbe is teaching Kabbalah to people like me and you. Well, if he's accused of being a counter-revolutionary, someone that's against the government, he's put into prison. And now the Holy Tzaddik, for 7 weeks, is being judged in heaven. Should the teachings of Chassidus be allowed to continue to be taught indiscriminately to men, women, and children, even if they're not yet worthy? Or should the teachings of Chassidus be reserved for those people that are worthy of it, and the practice of Chassidus will be for everyone. So everyone could try to be happy to serve God, but very few people will actually understand why it's important to be happy to serve God. Well, 7 weeks passed, and then the Tsar frees this man, which then was understood that in the heavenly court, it was debated amongst all of the tzaddikim, and the Baal Shem Tov, and the Magid, and the Arizal, and all of the masters of Kabbalah on the side of the Alter Rebbe. And essentially, it was decided in heaven that the generations until the coming of Mashiach need the mystical teachings, because the Holy Torah sometimes cannot be digested by people who don't have refined nature. All of us know when it comes to food that certain people can't digest certain foods, even though it might be nutritious. They have a delicate system, or they have something wrong with the sugar or with the salt, and so on and so forth. So good food doesn't work for everyone. The Torah is bread. The Torah is wine. The Torah is life itself. But if a person is unrefined, sometimes you can study the Chumash, you can study the Talmud, you could keep the laws of Shabbos and miss the whole point of Shabbos. But then comes the study of Chassidus that adds the dimension of holiness and spirituality, and even people that are very superficial somewhat are being introduced to these holy thoughts. So this is an accusation against the Rebbe. Yutes Kislev celebrates the redemption of the Rebbe and the allowance of the teachings of Chassidus. And that's why Chassidim tell the story that when he was in prison, towards the latter time of him being in prison, the Alter Rebbe was visited by two teachers who had long gone from this world, the Holy Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid of Mezrich. And the way we say it is, they came in their bodies. How do we know that? Because the previous Rebbe was told by his father that these two tzaddikim came to visit his great-great-great-great-grandfather. So the Frierdiker Rebbe sent someone to the cell. He wanted to know, is there room for 3 people? If it's a soul that comes to visit, you don't need to take physical place. So here the Alter Rebbe is being visited by the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid. According to the tradition, the Maggid, the Alter Rebbe says to the Baal Shem Tov, I'm being put into prison because I'm teaching your Torah. And the Baal Shem Tov says, really? Let me hear you teach. And the Alter Rebbe gave over a mimer that he heard from his Rebbe, the Maggid of Mezrich. And when the Baal Shem Tov heard that, he said to the Maggid, you taught him well. That's exactly what I meant to convey. And then the Alter Rebbe said, how come I'm in prison for teaching your Torah? And they said, because you're teaching everyone our Torah. Our Torah we taught primarily to great students, you're teaching everyone. So he said, should I stop? And their response was, no, once you started, you should continue even more expansively. And indeed, when he was freed from prison, from that day onwards, he began to teach much more at length and much more much more in depth, so people could actually understand him. So when it comes again, what are we doing here tonight? We're marking the celebration of the Rebbe who was freed from prison. More so, what we're actually celebrating is the Chassidic movement and the idea of the ability to understand God, which is the gift of all gifts. For a human being to understand God, that gift was given to us through the teachings of Chassidus. Ultimately, the teachings of Chassidus prepare us for the teachings of the Mashiach, who will truly give us a better understanding of the greatness of God.